and then also how to resize an image inside Photoshop. We're going to start with the crop tool. Before I jump into that, there's a third thing we're going to cover, which is part of the crop tool, and that is how to straighten an image. Let's start with the crop tool. And I'm using Photoshop 2015, just FYI. The crop tool is the 5th tool down. When you click on that, you're going to notice this bounding area around the picture or the image. Now, if you're using a version of Photoshop CS5 or earlier, it's not going to look like this. It's going to, let me just change the setting here really quick. Let me jump out of this crop tool. If you're using CS5 or earlier, when you click on the crop tool, you get the little cursor with the crop tool. You click and drag to create your box. Okay, so you can do it that way. I'm going to focus on the later versions of Photoshop. So I'm going to escape out of that, go back and change my settings to use the current version. So that's under, if you want to use the old way of doing the crop tool, simply go under this little gear icon after you select the crop tool in your toolbar and select use classic mode. Now we'll put the crop tool and it will behave as it did in Photoshop CS5 or earlier. And some of the same techniques that I'll be covering using this later version will be the same as prior versions, but the initial using the crop tool will be slightly different, as you just noticed. All right, so I've selected the crop tool. I get the dashed lines around the perimeter of my image, along with handles on each side, as well as handles in the corner. And you can simply click and drag any of those handles to make the crop that you would like to have. You also have some other options up here in what we call the control panel, or the options for the crop tool, which show up above the preview area. On that little drop down that says ratio, if you want to go to a certain size, you can select that. And then within that, you can move that around to grab the portion of the image that you want, but it will retain that specific size. As you do these, or as I'm doing these, I'm going to be hitting Control Z to undo some of the things I'm doing as I demonstrate different techniques. I'm going to go back to just the ratios. That's where if you want to go to a specific size, also a specific size with a certain resolution. We're going to talk about resolution when we get into resizing an image. Now, because I had chosen the 5x7, it plugs in the numbers here. This is the width and the height fields. I am going to get rid of those by highlighting and pressing delete. Get back to the default settings. There we go. I also have a clear button, which is another way I could have done that much easier. We're going to talk about this option, which is the straighten option, in just a second. And then the next icon over says set the overlay option. So you'll notice if you start dragging these handles in, immediately I get these lines happening. This is actually called the rule of thirds. And that's happening because of a setting underneath this icon, which says rule of thirds. And by default, that will be set. If you want some other type of lines out there, you can select any of those. Or if you don't want the lines, you can also say never show overlay. Okay. I already discussed this icon, which is the settings icon. You can use that to get back to the classic mode, which uses the previous versions of the crop tool from CS5 and earlier. And you have some other options. If you don't want to show this cropped area, if you deselect that, actually doesn't show what you're going to remove from the image, etc. I also want to talk about this next option here, is delete cropped pixels. I like to keep that turned off. If it's turned on, it prevents me from getting back to the original image. So I'm going to leave that turned off, and I'll show you the behavior in just a sec. So now that we understand the settings of the crop tool, and my guess is you'll just select the crop tool, grab your handles, go to the portion of the image that you want. And once you have that, you simply click on this check mark, which says, yeah, accept or commit the crop. If you don't want to do anything, you have this cancel, which will take you back out to the original image. The other option is to hit enter to take the crop. Okay, and there's the cropped image. Now if I want to get back to the original, remember I had this not selected, this option to delete cropped pixels. So watch this. If I go back to my crop tool and start to expand this up, the image that I had originally cut or cropped off is now there. So this little setting right here can be very helpful to leave that turned off. Okay. Any questions about the crop tool? Yeah, there's a question about, let me escape out of here or cancel this. Question about these options over here at the under this drop down where you can choose size of this. Let me go back to the original image. This is an FYI. Underneath File, there's a Revert option. That will take you back to what the image looked like when you first open it. Actually, it will take you back to the last saved version of the image. Let me demonstrate the options here when you select a certain size. So if I go to, say I want an 8 by 10, and then you can move this around on your image to grab the portion that you want. Whoops. Like so. And either you can click commit or enter and it will take that. And you still, because this was turned off, the delete crop pixels, I can still get back to the original image if I was to. Now you have to actually create or drag these handles to see the rest of the image again. And if I wanted to cancel that out, I'm going to Control Z. Now you may notice when you're using Photoshop, Control Z only does the last one. If you want to go back multiple steps, hold down Control Alt Z. On the Mac it will be Command Z or Command Option Z. And it will actually, I believe, maybe it doesn't work anymore. The other option is to use your history panel, and you can go back to the original. I know what I need. I need to escape out of this here. There we go. So the Control Alt Z was not working because I was inside the crop tool, so I escaped out. I canceled the crop tool to get back, and then my Control Alt Z worked to go back multiple steps. All right, I don't see any other questions about the crop tool. Let's move into resizing an image. Before we do that, let me jump to the other option inside the crop tool, which is the straighten option. Let me grab my crop tool. I'm going to do this now because once the resize image will not be dealing with the crop tool anymore. Let me clear this out. All right, to resize an image, again, I'm sorry, to straighten an image, I'm going to go back to my crop tool. I'm going to click on the straighten option. And it's best to use this on an image where there is some kind of line you can use within the image. So I'm going to use the shoreline, if you will, of this lake and draw a straight line across there. So I simply grab the straighten tool, the straightened option up in the control panel of the crop tool, and I'm clicking and dragging to create a line. I'm going to release my mouse, and immediately it straightens that image, so the line that I just drew becomes a straight line versus an angled line. Okay, let me demonstrate that one more time. I'm going to cancel this out. Again, you have to go to your crop tool, select the straighten option. I'm going to click and drag a line along the shoreline. Notice it's angled a little bit. As soon as I release my mouse, it's going to straighten to make that a straight horizontal line across the image. So that's how you can straighten an image. And it's going to do the necessary cropping because it actually turns the image a bit, so it does the necessary cropping of the image as well. Then you simply click commit or enter, and that becomes your image. All right, now let's move to the straighten. Yeah, I'm getting some response there. That straighten option inside the crop tool isn't obvious. It's a very, very handy way to quickly straighten your images versus guessing and doing it using some other techniques inside Photoshop. All right, now let's go to the resize an image discussion. To resize an image, this can get a little confusing, and there's a difference if you're doing an image for print versus doing it in a presentation or on your website or online. I'm going to jump to the image option of the main menu and go down to image size. Now there's two options here. You have canvas size and image size, and which one do we use? If you're working with an image, you're going to choose image size. Now if you're working with a document that has multiple layers, you'll probably go to canvas size, because canvas size controls what I would call the canvas behind the image. If I wanted to actually put a border around this image, let me show this to you. I'm going to go canvas. This will actually, I'm going to make the canvas larger. I'm going to go to inches on both of these. I'm also going to choose relative here, so it actually adds whatever I put in to width and height. Let's say I want to add 1/2 inch around the border of this image. So I'm going to do 1 inch, so top and bottom, left and right. So 1/2 inch on each. You can choose what color you want. I'm going to go, you can go with your foreground or background colors. I'm just going to go with black and click OK and watch what happens. So it adds this border around that back of that. So it's actually the canvas is the canvas size is actually what your image sits on, if you will. I tend not to use that so much when I'm working just with image. If I'm doing a poster or some other type of layout inside Photoshop, I might expand the canvas size. It makes the entire thing larger. I'm going to Control Z that out of there. Now let's talk about resizing just the image. I'm going to go back to image size. And you get this dialog box, and this can be a little confusing. Let me go back to the default settings here. I was playing with this recently. All right, when the image size dialog box comes up, it's going to show you the current size. And if I was to glance at this, I say, wow, that's a really large image. I need to make that smaller. But the other thing we need to pay attention to when we're resizing an image, which is very, very important, is this resolution. If I'm going to print this picture as is, it's not going to print at 45 by 34 inches as we see presented here. Right now, these values are showing what it would be if I was going to show it at 100% on my screen. But notice the resolution is 72. So monitors, computer monitors, have a different resolution than printers. The most resolution a monitor can be is 72. Actually, for Mac side is 96, but that's close enough. However, a printer, it can put a lot more pixels per inch or dots per inch when it prints. And most printers can go up to 300, and if you go to a print shop, they do 1200 plus pixels per inch. So if I was to print this image, I actually probably wouldn't change anything, because the printer is going to print at 300 pixels per inch, which is about 4 times the difference of what this is, or a quarter, I should say, difference of what this is. So when this prints, this will actually be a quarter of this size versus 45 by 34. Now I know it's incredibly confusing. It took me a while to look at this over and over for a period of time before I actually got it. But just be aware of this. What we're seeing here is if I were to display this at 100% on the screen, it would be quite large. Notice down here in my bottom left of my Photoshop desktop, I'm showing this right now at 25%. Okay. Let's say I want to use this on a web page though, and I know on a computer monitor the resolution is going to be what I'm seeing here, 72, and I don't want it to come in at quite this large, especially if I'm going to a website, because it will take up bandwidth. I want the image to download as quickly as possible. So to change the image size, say it's going to be more like and usually when we're working on web pages, we work in pixels versus inches. So let me change my unit of measure to pixels. And I have a width of, say, maybe around 400 pixels. So as I change that, the height is going to change along with it because we have this little lock icon turned on, so it retains the proportions of the original image. If I click OK, there's the image. Now remember, I'm showing this at 25%. If I do a Control-1, it shifts it to 100%. So that's exactly how it would look on my web page if I was to use it, or if I was to use it in some kind of presentation. Okay. I did a Control-1 to show it at 100%. You have another option under the View option of the main menu. You can zoom in and out, or the keyboard shortcut Control plus or Control minus, or you also have 100% here. Notice the keyboard shortcut Control-1. I want to cover one other thing about resizing images. Reducing an image size is no problem. However, when you start to enlarge an image, Photoshop has to guess what the color of those extra dots. Now, Photoshop handles this much better than it has in prior versions of, or I should say a number of years ago in the versions of Photoshop being used then. If you're going to enlarge an image, you can try that. And the best option here, you can leave it on automatic. When you start to enlarge an image, you want to make sure this resample is turned on, and then you can select which of these resampling options to use. And preserve details will probably give you the best quality. You can experiment, but I would either leave it on automatic, which will probably use preserve details, or just select preserve details if you're going to enlarge. And Photoshop provides hints here as to when to use these. I tend to always pretty much leave that on automatic. If I'm going to enlarge it quite a bit, I might turn this preserve details on. And sometimes I enlarge it in steps versus the entire enlargement at one time if it's a significant enlargement. All right, any questions about resizing an image? Yeah, if I go back to image size, you do have options here in the fit to, if you want to go to a specific size. Now you want to make sure you're starting with a large enough image to go down to these. If you have to go up to these, Photoshop will do its best to put in the colors, but really pay attention to how the image looks if you're enlarging it. All right, I think that wraps up our discussion of resizing an image. Thank you all for joining us. And again, I'm going to be doing this the second and fourth Fridays of the month, and it's really just a way for me to give back. I've been using Photoshop for many years, and have also trained on Photoshop for many years, and I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy helping others learn, and Photoshop is an incredibly useful package to know. So I'm hoping through these Friday morning webinars that it helps you in learning what you need to know about Photoshop. All right, if you need to get a hold of me, I don't have a slide at the moment to tell you how to get a hold of me. I'll probably add those in future webinars. You can go to onwardstudios.com. That's my website. There's a contact page on there if you shoot me an email there. Or you can just shoot me an email. My email address is karma, C-A-R-M-A, @onwardstudios.com. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning.